The morning Penelope Carmichael's husband died, she held his hand so tightly that her fingernails left crescents in his cooling skin, and even after the undertaker arrived, they had to pry her fingers loose one by one. That was 3 months ago in St. Louis, Missouri. And now she stood on the dusty main street of Bozeman, Montana territory in the spring of 1878, clutching her carpet bag with that same desperate grip while travelers pushed past her toward the stagecoach depot. The wind swept down from the mountains, carrying the scent of pine and snow, so different from the thick humidity of the Mississippi River. She had spent every cent she had getting here, following a half-remembered conversation with her late husband about his brother who had gone west years ago to trap and hunt in the wilderness. Samuel had mentioned that his brother sent letters from Bozeman occasionally, though they had arrived less and less frequently as the years passed. Penelope was 23 years old, a widow with no family left in St. Louis and no prospects. Samuel had been a clerk, and when the fever took him, it took their savings too, eaten up by doctors and medicines that did nothing but delay the inevitable. Her landlady had been sympathetic for exactly 2 weeks before demanding the back rent. The other widows at church had whispered behind their hands about how Penelope had clung to Samuel at the funeral, how she had refused to leave the graveside, how she had needed to be escorted away by the Reverend himself. "She clings too tight," one of them had said, loud enough for Penelope to hear. "It is unseemly. It is almost desperate." Perhaps it was desperate. Penelope had spent her whole life holding on to things that slipped away anyway. Her parents to influenza when she was 16, her infant daughter, born too early, who had lived only 3 hours, just long enough for Penelope to memorize every detail of her tiny face. And then Samuel, who had been kind and gentle and utterly unsuited for a world that demanded strength. She had held on to him too, as if the force of her grip could keep his soul tethered to his failing body. But here in Montana territory, no one knew her as the widow who clung too tight. Here, she could be anyone. If she could find Samuel's brother, perhaps she could find work as a housekeeper or a cook. Perhaps she could build something new from the ruins of her old life. The problem was that she had no address, no specific location, just a name, Cyrus Zane. And the knowledge that he lived somewhere in the mountains outside of Bozeman, trapping beaver and hunting elk, living the kind of rough life that Samuel had spoken of with equal parts admiration and bewilderment. Penelope approached the nearest respectable-looking establishment, a general store with a painted sign that read, "Morrison's Dry Goods and Sundries." The bell above the door chimed as she entered, and a portly man with impressive mutton chops looked up from behind the counter. "Help you, miss?" he asked, his eyes taking in her worn traveling dress and the way she gripped her carpet bag. "I am looking for someone," Penelope said, forcing her voice to remain steady. "A man named Cyrus Zane. I was told he lives in the mountains near here." The shopkeeper's eyebrows rose. "Zane? Sure, I know him. Mountain man, keeps to himself mostly. Comes into town every few months to trade pelts and stock up on supplies. Big fellow, quiet. Why would a lady like you be looking for someone like him?" "He is my late husband's brother," Penelope explained. "I have come from St. Louis. I need to find him." The shopkeeper's expression softened. "I'm sorry for your loss, madam, but Zane lives pretty far up in the mountains. Got himself a cabin up near the creek about 15 miles north of here. It is not an easy journey, and it is not the kind of place for a lady on her own." "I have nowhere else to go," Penelope said simply. Something in her tone must have convinced him, because he sighed and pulled out a piece of paper. "I will draw you a map, but you cannot make that journey alone. The trail is rough, and there are bears and mountain lions up there. Not to mention it is still cold at night, even though it is spring down here." He paused, studying her. "Zane was just in town 2 days ago, actually, stocked up on supplies. He usually does not come back for at least a month or 2 after that." Penelope's heart sank. 2 days. If she had arrived just 2 days earlier, she might have found him here in town. "There is a family heading up that direction tomorrow," the shopkeeper continued, sketching a rough map. "The Hendersons. They have a homestead about 8 miles north. They might be willing to take you that far, and from there it is another 7 miles or so to Zane's place. You would still have to make part of the journey on foot, but it is better than trying to do the whole thing alone." "Thank you," Penelope said, relief flooding through her. "Thank you so much. Where can I find the Hendersons?" "They are camped just outside of town on the North Road. You cannot miss them." big wagon, 3 kids running around. Just tell them Morrison sent you." Penelope found the Hendersons exactly where Morrison had said they would be. Mrs. Henderson was a sturdy woman with sun-weathered skin and kind eyes, and when Penelope explained her situation, she agreed immediately to let Penelope ride with them as far as their homestead. "We leave at first light," Mrs. Henderson said. "It is a hard journey, but the wagon trail is decent until we reach our place. After that, though, you will be on your own." "Are you sure about this? Mountain men like Zane are not exactly known for their hospitality, especially to unexpected visitors." "He is family," Penelope said. "It is all I have left." That night, Penelope slept in her clothes in the back of the Henderson wagon, listening to the sounds of the frontier town settling down for the night. Distant music from a saloon, the occasional bark of a dog, the wind rustling through the canvas cover above her head. She thought about Samuel, about the way he used to hold her hand when she woke from nightmares. She thought about what the women at church had said, about clinging too tight. Maybe they were right. Maybe there was something wrong with her, this need to hold on, to grip tightly to the people she loved, as if she could keep them safe through sheer force of will. But what else was she supposed to do? Let go? Accept that everything she loved would inevitably be taken from her? That seemed like a different kind of death, a slow erosion of the heart until there was nothing left but emptiness. The wagon lurched into motion just as the sun was rising over the mountains, painting the peaks in shades of gold and pink. Penelope sat in the back with the Henderson children, who ranged in age from about 5 to 12. They were curious about her, but too polite to ask many questions, though the youngest, a girl with blonde braids, kept staring at Penelope's carpet bag. "What do you have in there?" the girl finally asked. "Just my belongings," Penelope said softly. "Some clothes, a few books, some things that belong to my husband." "Is your husband going to meet you in the mountains?" the girl asked with the blunt innocence of childhood. "My husband passed away," Penelope said. "I am going to stay with his brother." The girl considered this, then nodded solemnly. "My grandpa died last winter. Mama said he went to be with the angels." "I am sure he did," Penelope said, though privately she was not sure of anything anymore. The journey to the Henderson homestead took most of the day. The wagon trail climbed steadily into the foothills, winding through forests of lodgepole pine and quaking aspen. Penelope had never seen country like this. In St. Louis, nature was something that happened in parks and gardens, carefully cultivated and controlled. Here, it was wild and overwhelming, stretching out in every direction until it met the mountains that rose like jagged teeth against the sky. They stopped once at midday to rest the horses and eat a cold lunch of bread and cheese. Mr. Henderson, a taciturn man who had barely spoken all morning, finally addressed Penelope directly. "You are sure about this?" he asked. "Going to find Zane? He's a good man as far as I know, honest in his dealings. But he lives rough, and he is not used to company, especially not female company." "I understand," Penelope said, "but I have no choice. I have no money, no family back in St. Louis. This is my only option." Mr. Henderson studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Well, you have grit. I will give you that. Not many city women would make this kind of journey alone." By late afternoon, they reached the Henderson homestead, a rough cabin with a barn and a few outbuildings, all of it carved out of the wilderness through backbreaking labor. Mrs. Henderson insisted that Penelope stay the night and start fresh in the morning, and Penelope gratefully accepted. She helped Mrs. Henderson prepare dinner, finding comfort in the familiar rituals of cooking and cleaning. And that night, she slept on a pallet near the fire, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the mountain night. At dawn, Mr. Henderson drew her a more detailed map to Cyrus Zane's cabin. "Follow the creek north," he said. "Stay on the west bank. You will know Zane's place when you see it. It is the only cabin up that way, and he has a lean-to for his horses and a smokehouse. It is a good 7 miles, maybe 8. Rough terrain, so take your time. And if you run into any wildlife, make noise. Most animals will avoid you if they hear you coming." Mrs. Henderson packed Penelope a bundle of food and made her take a thick wool blanket. "It gets cold at night," she said, "even in late April. And if Zane is not there, or if he turns you away, you come right back here. You understand? We will figure something out." Penelope thanked them profusely, knowing that their kindness was more than she had any right to expect, and set out on foot into the wilderness. The first mile was not too difficult. The terrain was rough but manageable, and the sound of the creek provided a constant guide. But as Penelope climbed higher into the mountains, the ground grew steeper and more uneven. Her boots, which had been perfectly adequate for the streets of St. Louis, were not designed for this kind of hiking. She could feel blisters forming on her heels, but she pushed on, driven by the knowledge that she had nowhere else to go. She stopped once to rest and eat some of the bread Mrs. Henderson had packed, sitting on a fallen log and listening to the rush of the creek. The water was crystal clear, so different from the muddy Mississippi. She could see smooth stones on the bottom, and as she watched, a fish darted past, quick as a thought. It was beautiful here, terrifying in its vastness, but beautiful. By late afternoon, her legs were aching and her blisters had definitely broken. She was beginning to worry that she had missed the cabin somehow, taken a wrong turn despite Mr. Henderson's careful directions, when she smelled smoke. Wood smoke, the kind that came from a chimney or a campfire. Penelope's heart began to pound as she pressed forward. Through the trees ahead she could see a clearing, and in the clearing a log cabin with a stone chimney. There was a lean-to shelter nearby, and she could see 2 horses under it. A smokehouse stood a little distance away, and various pelts were stretched on frames, drying in the sun. This had to be it. This had to be Cyrus Zane's cabin. Penelope approached slowly, suddenly aware of how she must look after a day of hiking through the wilderness. Her dress was dirty and torn at the hem, her hair had come loose from its pins, and she was limping from the blisters. She must look like some kind of wild woman herself. Before she could reach the cabin door, it opened, and a man stepped out. Penelope stopped in her tracks, her breath catching in her throat. He was enormous. That was her first thought. Cyrus Zane was at least 6.5 feet tall, with shoulders so broad they nearly filled the doorway. He was dressed in buckskin pants and a rough linen shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing forearms corded with muscle. His hair was dark brown, almost black, and it fell past his shoulders, tied back with a leather cord. He had a thick beard, but his eyes were clearly visible, and they were the same warm brown that Samuel's had been. Those eyes were currently studying her with a mixture of surprise and wariness. "Help you?" he asked. His voice was deep, roughened by years of disuse. "Are you Cyrus Zane?" Penelope asked, her own voice coming out breathless and uncertain. "I am," he said slowly. "Who is asking?" "My name is Penelope Carmichael," she said. "I was married to your brother, Samuel." Something flickered across his face. Surprise, certainly, but something else too. Something that might have been pain. "Samuel," he repeated. "How is he?" Penelope's throat tightened. "He passed away 3 months ago. A fever. I'm so sorry. I know you were not close, but I thought you should know." Cyrus Zane stood very still for a long moment. Then he nodded once, a short, sharp movement. "Come inside," he said. The cabin was small, but surprisingly well kept. There was a stone fireplace along one wall, a rough table with 2 chairs, a bed in one corner, and various shelves and hooks holding supplies and equipment. Furs were piled on the bed and draped over the chairs. It smelled of wood smoke and leather and something else, something wild and clean. Cyrus gestured for Penelope to sit at the table, and he poured her a cup of water from a bucket. She drank it gratefully, realizing how thirsty she was. "You walked here from the Hendersons?" he asked, his eyes taking in her torn dress and muddy boots. "Yes," Penelope said. "They were kind enough to bring me as far as their homestead." "That's a hard walk," Cyrus said. He pulled out the other chair and sat down, the wood creaking under his weight. "Why did you come all this way? To tell me about Samuel?" "Not just that," Penelope admitted. "I have nowhere else to go. When Samuel died, I lost everything. Our home, our savings. I have no family left in St. Louis. I remembered Samuel mentioning that you lived out here, and I thought perhaps you might need someone to keep house for you. A cook or a housekeeper. I can work hard. I promise I would not be a burden." Cyrus studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "You came all the way from St. Louis alone to ask a stranger if you could keep house for him?" "You are not a stranger," Penelope said. "You are family. You are the only family I have left." "I have not seen Samuel in 12 years, Cyrus said quietly. "We exchanged letters occasionally, but I barely knew him anymore. and I never knew you at all." "I know," Penelope said, "but I had nowhere else to turn. If you cannot help me, I understand. I will go back to town and try to find work there." Even as she said it, she knew how hollow it sounded. She had maybe 50 cents left to her name. She would be lucky to afford a week's lodging, let alone find employment in a rough frontier town where respectable work for women was scarce. Cyrus was quiet for so long that Penelope thought he was going to refuse. She could not blame him. What man wanted a strange woman showing up on his doorstep, desperate and penniless? But then he said, "You can stay." Penelope's head snapped up. "Truly?" "I do not need a housekeeper," Cyrus said bluntly. "I have been taking care of myself for years, but you are Samuel's widow, and that makes you family, whether we know each other or not. You can stay here until you figure out what you want to do next. There's not much room, but I can sleep in the lean-to with the horses. You can have the cabin." "I cannot ask you to sleep outside," Penelope protested. "You did not ask," Cyrus said. "I offered. It is still cold at night, but I have plenty of furs. I will be fine." Penelope felt tears prickling at her eyes. She had been braced for rejection, for another door closing in her face. His kindness, gruff as it was, threatened to undo her completely. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you so much." Cyrus nodded, looking uncomfortable with her gratitude. "You must be hungry. I have some elk stew from yesterday. It is not fancy, but it is filling." He served her a bowl of stew that was indeed simple but surprisingly good, rich with meat and wild herbs. Penelope ate ravenously, realizing she had not had a proper meal since leaving St. Louis. Cyrus ate his own portion in silence, and Penelope found herself studying him when she thought he was not looking. He was nothing like Samuel. Where Samuel had been slight and bookish, Cyrus was all raw strength and rough edges. His hands were scarred and calloused, the hands of a man who worked hard and lived harder. But there was something in the set of his jaw, the shape of his eyes, that reminded her achingly of her late husband. After dinner, Cyrus showed her where he kept various supplies, explaining in his quiet, economical way how to manage the cabin. "I will be gone most days," he said, "checking my trap lines, hunting. I usually come back by evening, but sometimes I'm gone overnight. There's a bar for the door. Use it when I am gone. And if anyone comes around while I'm not here, do not open the door. Most folks around here are decent, but there are always a few who are not." "I understand," Penelope said. Cyrus gathered up an armload of furs in his rifle. "I will be in the lean-to if you need anything. There's more wood stacked outside. Keep the fire going overnight. It gets cold." After he left, Penelope sat by the fire for a long time, trying to process everything that had happened. Just this morning, she'd been sleeping in the Henderson wagon. 2 days ago, she'd been in Bozeman. A week ago, she'd been in St. Louis, packing her meager belongings and saying goodbye to the only home she had ever known. And now, she was here, in a log cabin in the Montana mountains, dependent on the charity of a man she had just met. She should have felt frightened, or at least uncertain. Instead, she felt something that might have been hope. That night, Penelope lay in Cyrus Zane's bed, wrapped in furs that smelled of pine and smoke and something indefinably masculine, and for the first time in months, she slept without nightmares. She woke to the sound of someone chopping wood. Pale morning light filtered through the small window, and when Penelope pushed aside the furs and went to look out, she saw Cyrus in the clearing, wielding an axe with the kind of easy strength that spoke of years of practice. He had taken off his shirt despite the morning chill, and Penelope found herself staring at the play of muscles across his back and shoulders, the way his whole body moved with each swing of the axe. She looked away quickly, feeling her cheeks heat. It was improper to stare, and besides, she was still in mourning for Samuel. She should not be noticing other men, especially not in that way. But a treacherous part of her mind whispered that Samuel was gone, and she was still alive. And there was nothing wrong with noticing that Cyrus Zane was a remarkably well-built man. Penelope dressed quickly and tried to do something with her hair, which had become a tangled mess during her journey. She was attempting to pin it up when Cyrus knocked on the door and called, "Are you decent?" "Yes, come in," Penelope said. He entered, now wearing his shirt again, and set a bucket of fresh water on the table. "Creek water," he said. "I have coffee beans if you want to make some, and there's cornmeal for mush. I'm going to check the trap lines, but I will be back by afternoon." "Wait," Penelope said. Let me make you breakfast before you go." Cyrus looked surprised. "You do not have to do that." "I want to," Penelope said. "You are letting me stay here. The least I can do is cook." Something that might have been a smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "All right then. I would not say no to a hot breakfast." Penelope set to work, finding her way around the cabin's simple cooking supplies. She made cornmeal mush and coffee and fried some strips of salted pork she found hanging in the smokehouse. It was rough fare, but Cyrus ate it with apparent appreciation, and when he left an hour later, he actually thanked her. Alone in the cabin, Penelope took stock of her situation. She had no money and no immediate prospects, but she had shelter and safety, at least for now. Cyrus had said she could stay until she figured out what to do next, but Penelope knew she could not impose on his hospitality indefinitely. She would have to make herself useful, prove that she was not just another burden. She spent the day cleaning the cabin from top to bottom, sweeping the floor, organizing the supplies, and washing the few dishes and cooking implements. It was satisfying work, the kind that kept her hands busy and her mind occupied. By the time Cyrus returned in the late afternoon, the cabin was spotless, and Penelope had a pot of stew simmering over the fire. Cyrus stopped in the doorway, looking around with an expression of bemusement. "You have been busy," he said. "I hope you do not mind," Penelope said. "I needed something to do, and the cabin could use a good cleaning." "I do not mind," Cyrus said. He set down his pack and the rifle. "I'm not used to things being so neat, though. I might not know where to find anything anymore." "I did not move much," Penelope assured him, "just organized a bit." They ate dinner together, and this time the silence was a little less awkward. Penelope asked Cyrus about his trap lines, and he explained in his quiet way how he trapped beaver and marten, how he tracked elk and deer, how he read the signs of the forest. He spoke about the wilderness with a kind of reverence that Samuel had never shown for anything, and Penelope found herself fascinated. "Do you ever get lonely?" she asked without thinking. Cyrus considered the question seriously. "Sometimes," he admitted, "but I'm not good with people, never have been. Out here, I do not have to pretend to be something I'm not." "What do you mean?" Penelope asked. "Back in St. Louis when I was younger, I never fit in," Cyrus said. "I was too big, too rough, too quiet. People did not know what to make of me. Samuel was the one who could talk to anyone who fit into society. I always felt like I was wearing clothes that did not quite fit. Out here, I can just be myself." "I understand that," Penelope said softly. "I never quite fit in either. People always thought I was too much, too emotional, too clingy, too desperate. After Samuel died, the other widows could not wait to be rid of me." Cyrus met her eyes across the table. "They sound like fools." Something warm unfurled in Penelope's chest. She had expected judgment, or at least pity. Instead, there was only acceptance. The days settled into a rhythm. Cyrus would leave early to check his trap lines or hunt, and Penelope would spend the day taking care of the cabin. She mended his clothes, cooked his meals, and slowly began to explore the area immediately around the cabin. The wilderness that had seemed so terrifying at first began to feel almost welcoming in its wild, untamed way. In the evenings, she and Cyrus would eat dinner together, and gradually, conversation became easier. Cyrus was not talkative by nature, but Penelope learned to read his silences, to understand the small gestures that substituted for words. He taught her things without realizing he was teaching: how to read the weather in the clouds, how to tell fresh animal tracks from old, which plants were safe to eat and which were poisonous. And Penelope found herself watching him more than she should. The way he moved, all coiled strength and unconscious grace. The way his rare smiles transformed his face. The way he was unfailingly gentle with her, despite his size and strength. She tried to feel guilty about it. She was a widow. She should still be in mourning. But 3 months had passed since Samuel's death, and if Penelope was honest with herself, her marriage had been more about companionship than passion. She had cared for Samuel deeply, but she had never felt her heart race when he entered a room. She had never found herself staring at the way his hands moved, wondering what they would feel like against her skin. With Cyrus, she felt all of those things and more. She did not know if he felt anything for her. He was unfailingly polite, even kind, but he maintained a careful distance. He still slept in the lean-to, despite Penelope's repeated offers to take that space herself. He never touched her, except for the occasional brush of hands when passing dishes at dinner. 2 weeks after Penelope's arrival, a late spring storm rolled in from the mountains. Cyrus came back to the cabin earlier than usual, his face grim. "Bad weather coming," he said. "Might be snow. At this altitude, it can snow even in May." Penelope looked out the window at the darkening sky. "Will you be all right in the lean-to?" "I have weathered worse," Cyrus said, but Penelope noticed the way he glanced toward the door, as if already dreading the cold night ahead. "Please," she said, "stay in the cabin tonight. I will not be able to sleep if I am worrying about you freezing to death out there." Cyrus hesitated. "It would not be proper. You are a widow, and we are not married. If anyone knew you were living here alone with me, it would ruin your reputation." "Who is going to know?" Penelope asked. "We are 15 miles from the nearest neighbor, and I care more about you being safe than I do about propriety." Something flickered in Cyrus's eyes at her words, but he nodded. "All right. Just for tonight." The storm hit just after dark, and it was as fierce as Cyrus had predicted. Wind howled around the cabin, and snow began to fall in thick, wet flakes. Penelope was profoundly grateful that Cyrus was inside with her, safe and warm. They sat by the fire after dinner, listening to the storm rage outside. Penelope had been mending one of Cyrus's shirts, but her hands had gone still, the needle forgotten. "What was Samuel like?" Cyrus asked suddenly. "I knew him when we were boys, but people change." Penelope thought about her late husband, trying to find the right words. "He was kind," she said finally. "Gentle. He loved books and learning. He was not strong, not in body, but he was strong in spirit. He never complained, even when he was sick. He just kept saying he was sorry, as if dying was something he was doing to me on purpose." Her voice broke on the last words, and she felt tears spilling down her cheeks. She had not cried since the funeral, had not let herself, but now it all came pouring out. The grief, the fear, the loneliness of the past 3 months. "I'm sorry," she gasped. "I did not mean to break down like this." "You have nothing to apologize for," Cyrus said, and then he was moving, crossing the small space between them. He knelt in front of her chair and took her hands in his. His hands were huge, rough and calloused, but his touch was infinitely gentle. "Grief is not weakness," he said, "and you have been through more than most people could bear." Penelope looked down at their joined hands, at the way her small, pale fingers looked cradled in his larger, darker ones. "The other widows in St. Louis said I clung too tight," she whispered. "They said it was unseemly, the way I would not let go of Samuel at the end. They said I should have been more dignified, more composed." "They were wrong," Cyrus said fiercely. "There is nothing wrong with loving someone completely, with holding on to them for as long as you can. That is not weakness, that is courage." Penelope raised her eyes to his, and the intensity in his gaze took her breath away. "You really believe that?" "I do," Cyrus said. "People spend so much time afraid of caring too much, of showing what they really feel. But what is the point of loving someone if you hold yourself back? If you only give them half of your heart, afraid they might leave or die or break you? That's not love. That is cowardice." "Have you ever loved anyone like that?" Penelope asked softly. Cyrus was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I'm starting to think I might be." Penelope's breath caught. "Cyrus." "I know it is too soon," he said quickly. "You are still mourning Samuel, but I want you to know that you are not a burden. Having you here, these past 2 weeks, has been the best part of my life in a long time, maybe ever. And if those people in St. Louis thought you clung too tight, then they were fools. Because if someone loved me the way you loved Samuel, I would never want them to let go." Penelope felt her heart pounding so hard, she thought it might break through her chest. "I cared for Samuel," she said. "I truly did. But what I feel when I look at you is different. It frightens me how quickly it has grown. It has only been 2 weeks, and already I cannot imagine leaving here, leaving you." "Then do not," Cyrus said simply. "Stay, for as long as you want. Forever, if you want that." "People will talk," Penelope said weakly. "Let them," Cyrus said. "We are not going to live our lives based on what people might say." If you want to stay here with me, then stay. And when enough time has passed, when you are ready, maybe we can make it official. Get married. But only if that is what you want. I will not pressure you." "I am supposed to be in mourning for a year," Penelope said. "It is what is expected." "Do you love Samuel's memory enough to be miserable for a year to appease society's expectations?" Cyrus asked. "Or do you love it enough to honor what he would have wanted for you, which was to be happy?" Penelope thought about Samuel, about the kind of man he had been. He had never been jealous or possessive. He had wanted her to be happy, even when his own happiness was slipping away in the grip of fever. "He would want me to be happy," she whispered. "Then be happy," Cyrus said. "With me, if that is what you want." Penelope realized she was still gripping his hands, holding on with all the desperate strength that the women in St. Louis had criticized. But Cyrus was not pulling away. He was holding on just as tightly, as if he never wanted to let go either. "Yes," she said. "Yes, that is what I want." Cyrus's smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. He raised her hands to his lips and kissed her knuckles, one by one, a gesture so tender it made her heart ache. "Then we will make it work," he said. "Whatever people say, whatever obstacles there are, we will find a way." That night, Cyrus slept on the floor by the fire, wrapped in furs, while Penelope lay in the bed. But before she went to sleep, she reached down and found his hand in the darkness, and they fell asleep that way, fingers intertwined. The storm raged for 2 more days, trapping them in the cabin together. But Penelope did not mind. She and Cyrus talked for hours, sharing stories about their childhoods, their dreams, their fears. Cyrus told her about coming west as a young man, about learning to survive in the wilderness, about the peace he had found in solitude. Penelope told him about her parents, about the daughter she had lost, about the crushing weight of grief that had nearly destroyed her after Samuel's death. "I was afraid I would never feel anything again," she admitted. "After Samuel died, it was like something inside me had gone numb. I could not imagine ever being happy again, ever feeling joy or hope or even simple contentment. But then I came here, and you were so kind, and suddenly I could feel again. It hurt at first, like blood rushing back into a frozen limb, but now it just feels like being alive." "I know that feeling," Cyrus said. "I was numb for a long time, too, after I came out here. Not from grief, but from loneliness. I told myself I preferred solitude, that I did not need anyone. But the truth is I was just afraid of being rejected, of not being enough. Out here, I did not have to risk that." "And now?" Penelope asked. "Now I'm still afraid," Cyrus admitted, "but I'm more afraid of letting you go than I am of getting hurt." On the 3rd day, the storm broke, and the world outside the cabin was transformed. Everything was covered in a blanket of fresh snow that sparkled in the sunlight. Penelope stood in the doorway, marveling at the beauty of it. "I've never seen anything like this," she said. "In St. Louis, snow just made everything dirty and gray. But this is beautiful." Cyrus came to stand beside her. "That is one thing I love about living out here. Every day is different. The wilderness is always changing, always showing you something new." They spent the day digging out from the storm, clearing snow away from the door in the smokehouse, checking on the horses. Penelope helped as much as she could, and she noticed the way Cyrus watched her, as if he could not quite believe she was real. That evening, as they sat by the fire, Cyrus said, "I need to go into Bozeman in a few days, stock up on supplies, trade some pelts. I was thinking you could come with me if you want. Get some proper clothes for living out here, maybe some fabric so you can make yourself some new dresses." "I do not have any money," Penelope said. "I do," Cyrus said, "from selling pelts. And if we are going to do this, if you are going to stay here with me, then what is mine is yours." "We are not married yet," Penelope protested. "Does not matter," Cyrus said. "You are my family. That's enough." The trip to Bozeman took most of a day, riding double on one of Cyrus's horses. Penelope sat in front of him, cradled in the circle of his arms, feeling safer than she had in months. When they reached town, several people stared at them, and Penelope could practically hear the gossip starting. But Cyrus did not seem to care. He took her to Morrison's Dry Goods and told her to pick out whatever she needed. Penelope chose practical things: sturdy fabric for dresses, a good pair of boots, a warm coat. Cyrus added a few items she had not thought of, like a proper sunbonnet and leather gloves for working. While Cyrus was trading his pelts, Penelope wandered through the store, running her fingers over the bolts of fabric and the ready-made goods. She found herself smiling, realizing that she was happy, genuinely happy, for the first time in a long time. "Mrs. Carmichael," a voice said behind her, and Penelope turned to see a well-dressed woman about her age. "I heard you had come to town. I am Mrs. Fletcher. My husband owns the hotel." "It is nice to meet you," Penelope said politely. "I could not help but notice you arrived with Cyrus Zane," Mrs. Fletcher said, her tone dripping with false sweetness. "I did not realize you two were acquainted." "He is my late husband's brother," Penelope said. "Ah," Mrs. Fletcher said. "And you are staying with him? In his cabin? How very modern of you." Penelope felt her cheeks heat, but she kept her voice steady. "Mr. Zane has been very kind to me during a difficult time." "I'm sure he has," Mrs. Fletcher said, "but you must know that people will talk. A young widow living alone with a man, even if he is family, it is simply not done. I do hope you are being careful with your reputation." "I appreciate your concern," Penelope said, though she did not appreciate it at all. "But my reputation is my own business." Mrs. Fletcher's smile turned brittle. "Of course, I was merely trying to be helpful. We have a small community here, and we do like to look after our own." After Mrs. Fletcher left, Morrison himself came over, his expression apologetic. "Do not mind her," he said. "She's always looking for something to gossip about. Cyrus Zane is a good man, and anyone with eyes can see he cares about you." "Thank you," Penelope said, feeling a rush of gratitude. When Cyrus finished his business, they loaded their purchases onto the horse and prepared to leave. But before they did, Cyrus said, "There's one more stop I want to make." He led her to a small church at the edge of town, and Penelope's heart began to pound. "Cyrus, what are we doing here?" she asked. "I have been thinking," Cyrus said, "about what you said, about people talking. And I do not care what they say, but I do not want to make your life harder. So I thought maybe we could talk to the Reverend, find out what it would take to get married, if that is still what you want." "It is," Penelope said, "but we have only known each other for 2 weeks. Is that not too fast?" "Is it?" Cyrus asked. "I feel like I have known you my whole life, like I was waiting for you, even though I did not know it. And life is short, Penelope. Samuel knew that. I know it too, from living out here where every day is a fight to survive. If we love each other, why should we wait?" "I do love you," Penelope said, the words spilling out before she could stop them. "I know it is too soon, and I know it is not what I should be feeling, but I do. I love you." Cyrus's expression softened, and he cupped her face in his big hands. "I love you too," and he said, "So let us go talk to the Reverend." The Reverend, an older man with kind eyes, listened to their story without judgment. "It is unusual," he admitted, "but I've seen enough of life to know that love does not follow a schedule. If you two want to be married, I will perform the ceremony. But I would suggest you wait at least a few weeks. Give yourselves time to be absolutely certain." "A month," Cyrus said, looking at Penelope. "We will come back in a month if you still want to marry me." "I will," Penelope said. "I know I will." The ride back to the cabin felt different, charged with promise. Penelope leaned back against Cyrus's chest, feeling his heartbeat against her spine, and thought about the future. A month from now, she would be married to this man. She would be Penelope Zane, wife of a mountain man, living in a cabin in the wilderness. It was nothing like the life she had imagined for herself, but it was everything she wanted. The next few weeks passed in a blur of happiness and hard work. Penelope sewed herself a new dress for the wedding, a simple but pretty design in deep blue fabric. Cyrus built her a proper wardrobe to store her things, and together they planted a small garden near the cabin. Penelope had never done any real gardening before, but Cyrus taught her with the same patient care he showed for everything. They grew closer in ways both large and small. Cyrus began sleeping in the cabin, on a pallet near the fire, so they could talk late into the night. He told her about his childhood, about how he had always felt like an outsider in his own family, too rough and uncouth for their genteel St. Louis society. She told him about the loneliness of her marriage to Samuel, about how she had cared for him, but had always felt like something was missing. "I feel terrible saying that," she admitted. "Samuel was a good man. He deserved better than a wife who was only half there." You gave him everything you had to give, Cyrus said. That is more than most people do. And it is not your fault that you were not in love with him. You cannot force those feelings. Did you ever come close to marrying? Penelope asked. Once, Cyrus admitted. There was a woman in town a few years back. She seemed interested, and I thought maybe I could build a life with her. But she wanted me to give up the cabin, move into town, become respectable. And I realized that she did not want me. She wanted some idea of what she thought I could become. So I ended it. I would never ask you to change, Penelope said. I love you exactly as you are. I know, Cyrus said, and the way he looked at her made her heart race. That is why I'm going to marry you. 3 days before the wedding, Cyrus had to leave to check his trap lines, something he had been neglecting while spending time with Penelope. I will be back tomorrow, he promised. But if anything happens, if you need anything, you go straight to the Hendersons. Do not wait for me. I will be fine, Penelope assured him. It is just 1 day. But after Cyrus left, the cabin felt emptier than it ever had before. Penelope tried to keep busy, working on her wedding dress, preparing food for the journey back to Bozeman, but she found her attention wandering. She kept looking toward the door, waiting for Cyrus to return. This was what the women in St. Louis had criticized, she realized. This need to have him near, to know he was safe. She was clinging again, letting herself become too dependent on another person. But Cyrus had said that was not weakness. He had said it was courage to love someone completely, to hold on with both hands and not let go. She was still thinking about this when she heard horses outside. Penelope's first thought was that Cyrus had come back early, but the voices she heard were unfamiliar and rough. Her heart began to pound as she remembered Cyrus's warning. She barred the door and moved away from the window, pressing herself against the wall. Someone pounded on the door. "Open up! We know someone is in there!" Penelope did not answer. "We saw the smoke from the chimney," the voice continued. "We are just passing through, need some supplies. We can pay." Still, Penelope said nothing. Something about the man's tone set her teeth on edge. There was a moment of silence, then the sound of someone trying the door. Finding it barred, the man cursed. "Suit yourself," he called. "But we are taking what we need from the smokehouse. You tell Zane that he will get his payment when we come back through." Penelope heard them moving around outside, heard the door to the smokehouse open. She wanted to shout at them to leave, but she knew better. Cyrus had taught her enough about the frontier to know that challenging armed men when you were alone and unarmed was a good way to get hurt or killed. After what felt like an eternity, she heard the horses leaving. Penelope waited a full hour before unbarring the door and looking outside. The smokehouse door was hanging open, and when she checked inside, she found that they had taken several sides of elk meat and all of the smoked fish. She felt violated, even though they had not actually entered the cabin. This was her home now, and someone had come and taken what was not theirs. When Cyrus returned the next morning, he found Penelope sitting on the front step, his rifle across her knees. She had not slept all night, too worried that the men might come back. Cyrus was off his horse in an instant, his face creased with concern. "What happened?" Penelope told him everything, her voice shaking. Cyrus listened without interrupting, then examined the smokehouse and the tracks the horses had left. "3 men," he said. "Headed north, probably drifters looking for easy targets." He turned to Penelope, and his expression was fierce. "You did exactly the right thing. You stayed inside, stayed safe. That meat can be replaced. You cannot." "I was so frightened," Penelope admitted, "not just for myself, but for you. What if they had come back? What if something had happened to you?" Cyrus pulled her into his arms, and Penelope clung to him, her face pressed against his chest. "I am fine," he murmured. "We are both fine. But I do not like leaving you alone out here. It is not safe." "What are we going to do?" Penelope asked. "Get married like we planned," Cyrus said. "And then we will figure out the rest. Maybe I need to teach you how to shoot so you can defend yourself if I am not here. Or maybe we need to think about building a place closer to town where you would have neighbors." "I do not want to leave the cabin," Penelope said. "I love it here." "Then we will make it work," Cyrus said. "Together." 2 days later, they rode into Bozeman for the wedding. It was a simple ceremony, just Penelope and Cyrus and the Reverend, with Morrison and his wife as witnesses. Penelope wore her blue dress, and Cyrus had cleaned up as much as a mountain man could. shaving his beard down to stubble and tying his long hair back. When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, Cyrus kissed her with a tenderness that made Penelope's knees weak. She was married. She was Penelope Zane now, and this huge, gentle man was her husband. They spent their wedding night in the hotel in a real bed with clean sheets. It was the first time they had been truly alone together without the barrier of propriety between them, and Penelope found herself nervous. "We do not have to do anything," Cyrus said softly, "if you're not ready." "I am ready," Penelope said. "I just do not have much experience. Samuel and we were together, but it was never very passionate. I do not want to disappoint you." "You could never disappoint me," Cyrus said. He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs stroking her cheekbones. "I love you, Penelope, not for what you can give me, but for who you are. Everything else is just extra." He kissed her then, slow and deep, and Penelope felt herself melting into him. His hands were gentle as he helped her out of her dress, as he laid her down on the bed and covered her body with his own. He was patient and careful, making sure she was ready before he joined with her, and when they finally came together, it was nothing like what Penelope had experienced with Samuel. This was passion, raw and overwhelming. This was two people coming together as equals, giving and taking in equal measure. Penelope found herself clinging to Cyrus, her nails digging into his shoulders, and he did not seem to mind at all. He seemed to revel in it, in her need for him, in the way she could not seem to get close enough. Afterwards, they lay tangled together, sweaty and breathless and utterly content. Cyrus held her close, one big hand stroking through her hair, and Penelope felt tears sliding down her cheeks. "Are you all right?" Cyrus asked, concerned. "I am perfect," Penelope said. "I am just so happy. I did not think I could ever feel like this again." "Neither did I," Cyrus admitted. "I thought I would spend the rest of my life alone, and then you showed up, and everything changed." "The women in St. Louis would say I am clinging to you," Penelope said. "They would say it is unseemly, the way I need you." "Then it is a good thing we are not in St. Louis," Cyrus said. He tipped her face up to his brown eyes serious. "Listen to me, Penelope. I do not ever want you to hold back what you feel. I do not want you to let go or give me space or any of that nonsense. I want you to cling to me as tightly as you want, because I am going to hold on to you just as tight, and I am never going to let you go." Penelope kissed him then, pouring all of her love and gratitude into it. This man, this rough mountain man who society would say was unsuitable for her, was everything she had ever wanted. He saw her need not as a flaw, but as a gift. He wanted her exactly as she was, with all of her intensity and passion and desperate love. They returned to the cabin as husband and wife, and life settled into a new rhythm. Cyrus taught Penelope how to shoot, and she proved to be a surprisingly good shot. He also taught her how to ride better, how to track animals, how to read the wilderness. In turn, Penelope made the cabin into a real home, with curtains on the windows and herbs growing in pots on the windowsill. The garden they had planted began to flourish, and Penelope found she loved the work of tending it, watching things grow from seeds into food. She also began to explore the wilderness around the cabin more confidently, always staying within sight of home, but learning the lay of the land. In the late summer, they had visitors. The Hendersons came by with their children, bearing fresh eggs and news from town. Mrs. Henderson hugged Penelope tightly and said, "I am so glad things worked out for you. I could tell Cyrus was a good man, but I was not sure how you would adjust to life out here." "I love it," Penelope said honestly. "I never thought I would, but I do. It is hard work, and sometimes it is lonely, but I have never been happier." "That is plain to see," Mrs. Henderson said, smiling. "You are glowing." It was true. Penelope could feel it herself, a contentment that ran bone deep. She had found her place in the world, and it was here, in this cabin in the mountains, with a man who loved her completely. In the fall, Cyrus took Penelope on a hunting trip, the two of them riding deep into the mountains to a place where the elk gathered. They camped under the stars, and Cyrus showed her constellations she had never seen in the light-polluted skies over St. Louis. They made love in their bedroll, under the open sky, and Penelope thought she had never felt so alive. They brought down an elk together, Penelope making the first shot and Cyrus finishing it, and they worked side by side to butcher and preserve the meat. It was grueling work, but Penelope felt a fierce pride in it. She was providing for her family, for the life she and Cyrus were building. When winter came, they were prepared. The smokehouse was full, the root cellar stocked with vegetables from the garden, and they had enough firewood to last through the coldest months. They spent long evenings by the fire, Penelope sewing or reading aloud from one of the books she had brought from St. Louis, while Cyrus worked on various projects, repairing traps or tanning hides. It was during one of those evenings in late December that Penelope realized she had missed her monthly courses. She had been so busy, so focused on adapting to her new life, that she had not noticed until she stopped to count the days. She did not say anything to Cyrus at first, not wanting to get his hopes up in case she was wrong. But when another week passed and still nothing happened, she began to suspect that she might be with child. The thought filled her with equal parts joy and terror. She had been pregnant once before, with Samuel, and she had lost that baby. What if it happened again? What if she got her hopes up, only to have them crushed? But she could not keep it from Cyrus. He was her husband, and he deserved to know. One evening, as they were getting ready for bed, Penelope said, "Cyrus, I need to tell you something." He looked up from stoking the fire, his expression immediately concerned. "What is it? Is something wrong?" "No, nothing is wrong," Penelope said quickly. "At least, I do not think so. I think I might be with child." Cyrus went very still. Then he crossed the room in 2 long strides and pulled her into his arms. "Truly?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "I am fairly certain," Penelope said, "but I want to wait a bit longer before we are sure. I lost a baby once before with Samuel. I do not want to get our hopes up if it happens again." "It will not happen again," Cyrus said fiercely. "I will not let it." "You cannot control everything," Penelope said gently, "but I am going to hope. I'm going to believe that this time will be different." As the weeks passed, Penelope's pregnancy became undeniable. Her belly began to swell, and she felt the first flutterings of movement. Cyrus was almost comically protective, insisting that she not lift anything heavy, that she rest more, that she eat the best portions of food. "I am pregnant, not made of glass," Penelope protested, but secretly she loved his attentiveness. It was not smothering, the way it might have been with another man. It was simply Cyrus's way of showing his love, of taking care of her. In the early spring, when the snow was beginning to melt, Cyrus insisted they go into town so Penelope could be examined by the doctor. The doctor, an elderly man with gentle hands, confirmed what Penelope already knew. "You are healthy and the baby seems to be growing well," he said. "I would expect you to deliver sometime in late June or early July. Do you want to come into town when your time is near? I can arrange for you to stay with a family so I can be on hand." Penelope looked at Cyrus, and he squeezed her hand. "Whatever you want," he said. "I want to have the baby at home," Penelope said, "in our cabin. Can you come to us when the time comes?" "It is a long ride," the doctor said, "and babies do not always come on schedule. But if you are determined, I can give you instructions for your husband, and I will come as soon as I get word, though there may be a delay." Cyrus and Penelope agreed to the plan, and the doctor gave them a list of supplies they would need. They spent the rest of the day in town, purchasing cloth for baby clothes and blankets, and Penelope felt a growing excitement. She was going to be a mother. After all the loss and grief, she was getting a second chance. The months of waiting were both the longest and shortest of Penelope's life. She spent her days preparing for the baby, sewing tiny gowns and knitting soft blankets. Cyrus built a cradle, working on it in the evenings with painstaking care, sanding and oiling the wood until it was smooth as silk. They talked about names, about what kind of parents they wanted to be, about their hopes and fears for the future. Cyrus admitted that he was terrified of doing something wrong, of not being a good father. "You will be wonderful," Penelope assured him. "You are patient and kind, and you already take care of me so well. A child is just another person to love." "But children are fragile," Cyrus said. "What if I hurt the baby by accident? I'm so much bigger and stronger than a newborn." "You will be gentle," Penelope said. "You are always gentle with me, even though you could easily overpower me if you wanted to. You will be the same with our child." In late June, Penelope's labor began in the middle of the night. She woke with a gasp, feeling the first contraction tighten across her belly. Cyrus was awake in an instant, his face pale in the moonlight. "Is it time?" he asked. "I think so," Penelope said, breathing through the pain. "You need to ride to town, get the doctor." "I'm not leaving you alone," Cyrus said. "You have to," Penelope said. "We need the doctor." Cyrus looked torn, his jaw clenched. Then he said, "I will go to the Hendersons. It is closer. Mrs. Henderson has had 3 children. She can help until the doctor arrives." It was a compromise, and Penelope agreed. Cyrus rode out into the night, and Penelope was alone with the pain and the fear. She had done this before, with Samuel, but that baby had come too early and too fast. This time felt different, slower and more deliberate, as if her body knew what it was doing. Cyrus returned within 2 hours with Mrs. Henderson, who took charge immediately. She examined Penelope, helped her through the contractions, and told Cyrus what to do. He was like a man possessed, following every instruction to the letter, heating water and fetching supplies, and holding Penelope's hand when the pain grew too intense. "You are doing so well," Mrs. Henderson said encouragingly. "It will not be much longer now." The doctor arrived just after dawn, and by that time, Penelope was fully in the throes of labor. She clung to Cyrus's hand, squeezing so hard she thought she might break his fingers, but he never complained. He just murmured encouragement, telling her how strong she was, how proud he was of her. And then, finally, the baby came. A boy with a lusty cry and a head full of dark hair like his father's. "A son," the doctor said, placing the baby in Penelope's arms. "A fine, healthy son." Penelope looked down at her baby, at his tiny, perfect face and waving fists, and she felt tears streaming down her cheeks. This time, her baby was alive. This time, she would get to watch him grow. Cyrus was staring at his son with an expression of absolute wonder. "He is so small," he whispered. "He will grow," the doctor said, amused. "With a father your size, he will probably be a big boy." After the doctor and Mrs. Henderson left, Penelope and Cyrus were alone with their son. They named him Samuel, after Cyrus's brother and Penelope's first husband, but they called him Sam. Cyrus held the baby with exquisite care, his huge hands cradling the tiny body, and Penelope fell in love with him all over again. "I was so afraid," she admitted, "afraid that something would go wrong, that I would lose this baby too." "But you did not," Cyrus said. "He is here, and he is healthy, and we are going to raise him together." The months after Sam's birth were exhausting but joyful. Penelope had never been so tired in her life, but she had never been so happy either. Sam was a good baby, healthy and strong, and he seemed to grow bigger every day. Cyrus was a wonderful father, just as Penelope had known he would be. He would hold Sam for hours, letting the baby sleep on his broad chest while Penelope rested. He sang to Sam in a low, rumbling voice, songs that Cyrus's own mother had sung to him when he was small. He was patient with the crying, with the sleepless nights, with all the chaos that a baby brought. As Sam grew, Penelope and Cyrus's life continued to evolve. They made trips into town more often, so Sam could be around other children, and so Penelope could have adult conversation beyond just the two of them. They became part of the small community around Bozeman, known as the Mountain Man and his wife, who lived up in the high country. People stopped gossiping about them once they saw how happy Penelope and Cyrus were together. Even Mrs. Fletcher eventually thawed, admitting that perhaps she'd been too quick to judge. When Sam was 2 years old, Penelope discovered she was pregnant again. This time, she was not afraid. Her body had proven it could carry a baby to term, and she had Cyrus by her side. Their second child, a daughter they named Sarah, was born in the cabin just like her brother, with Cyrus and Mrs. Henderson in attendance. 2 years after that came another son, whom they named Daniel. By then the cabin was getting cramped, and Cyrus began building an addition, 2 more rooms to accommodate their growing family. Penelope's life was nothing like what she had imagined when she left St. Louis. She spent her days cooking and cleaning and caring for children, tending the garden and preserving food for the winter. It was hard work, physically demanding in a way that her life in the city had never been. But it was also deeply satisfying, watching her children grow strong and healthy, seeing the life she and Cyrus had built with their own hands. The children adored their father, climbing on him like he was a mountain to be conquered. Cyrus was endlessly patient with them, teaching them about the wilderness, showing them how to track animals and identify plants and survive in the wild. But he was also gentle, quick to comfort a skinned knee or soothe a nightmare. And he never stopped loving Penelope with the same fierce intensity he had shown from the beginning. Even with 3 children and a decade of marriage behind them, he still looked at her like she was the most precious thing in his world. One evening, when the children were finally asleep and they had a rare moment of peace, Penelope said, "Do you ever regret it, letting me stay here all those years ago?" Cyrus pulled her into his arms and she settled against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "Never," he said, "not for a single moment. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Penelope Zane." "The women in St. Louis said I clung too tight," Penelope murmured, "but you never seemed to mind." "Mind?" Cyrus said. He tipped her face up to his brown eyes warm in the firelight. "I wanted you to cling to me. I still do. I never want you to let go." "Good," Penelope said, "because I do not plan to." They kissed then, a slow, deep kiss that held all the years of love and partnership and shared joy. Penelope felt Cyrus's arms tighten around her, holding her close, and she clung to him just as tightly. This was what love was supposed to be, she realized. Not holding back, not protecting yourself against potential hurt. It was giving everything you had, holding on with both hands and trusting that the other person would hold on just as tight. As the years passed, their family continued to grow. Another daughter arrived when Sarah was 5, a quiet, thoughtful girl they named Ruth. And 2 years after that, their last child, a son they named James, made his appearance. The cabin was full to bursting with children and love and laughter. It was chaotic and messy and sometimes overwhelming, but Penelope would not have changed a thing. This was the life she had been meant for, even though she had never known it until she stumbled into Cyrus's clearing all those years ago. The children grew and thrived. Sam became a skilled hunter like his father, serious and thoughtful. Sarah was quiet but observant, always watching and learning. Daniel was adventurous, constantly getting into scrapes. Ruth was the peacemaker, gentle and kind. And James, the baby, was full of mischief and joy. Cyrus taught the boys to trap and hunt, to read the weather and navigate by the stars. Penelope taught the girls to cook and sew and tend the garden, though all the children learned all the skills. Because in the wilderness, everyone had to be able to do everything. They made trips to Bozeman several times a year, and the town continued to grow around them. The frontier was slowly being tamed, the wild edges smoothed away. But up in the mountains, life continued much as it always had, governed by the seasons and the rhythms of nature. When Sam turned 16, he began to talk about going into town, maybe learning a trade. Penelope felt a pang at the thought of her oldest leaving, but she understood. The world was changing, and her children would have to find their place in it. But for now, they were all still together, still a family. And Penelope knew, with a certainty that went bone deep, that no matter where her children went or what they did, they would carry with them the lessons Cyrus and Penelope had taught them about love and loyalty and holding on to what mattered. One autumn evening, when the aspens were turning gold and the air had the sharp bite of approaching winter, Penelope and Cyrus sat on the porch of their cabin, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of orange and red. The children were inside, the older ones helping the younger ones get ready for bed. And for a moment, Penelope and Cyrus had a rare moment of solitude. "It has been a good life," Penelope said softly. "The best," Cyrus agreed. He reached for her hand, and their fingers intertwined with the ease of long practice. "I still cannot believe sometimes that you showed up here all those years ago, that you chose to stay." "I did not have much choice at the time," Penelope said, smiling. "I was desperate and penniless." "But you stayed even after you had other options," Cyrus said. "You could have gone back to town, found work, built a different life. But you chose this. You chose me." "I chose you because I loved you," Penelope said simply. "Because you saw me, really saw me, and you loved me anyway. You never thought I was too much or too clingy or too desperate. You just thought I was perfect exactly as I was." "Because you are," Cyrus said. He raised her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles one by one, just as he had done that first night when they confessed their feelings for each other. "You are perfect, Penelope. and I have never wanted you to let go of me. Not for a single second." "I never will," Penelope promised. "I am going to hold on to you for the rest of our lives." "Good," Cyrus said, and he pulled her close, wrapping her in his arms. They sat that way as the sun sank below the mountains and the stars began to appear, holding on to each other, just as they always had. Inside the cabin, they could hear the children settling down for the night, their voices a soft murmur. This was their legacy, Penelope thought, not just the children themselves, but the love they had learned from watching their parents, the knowledge that it was okay to need someone, to hold on tight, to love with your whole heart. The women in St. Louis had said Penelope clung too tight, as if that were a failing. But Cyrus had seen it for what it really was, a fierce, unwavering capacity for love, and he had matched her, intensity for intensity, clinging to her just as tightly as she clung to him. As the years continued to pass, Penelope and Cyrus grew older together. Their children grew up and began to build their own lives. Sam did eventually leave to learn carpentry in town, but he came back often, bringing his new skills to help improve the homestead. Sarah married a young man from Bozeman and settled nearby, close enough that Penelope could visit her grandchildren regularly. Daniel followed in his father's footsteps, becoming a guide for hunting parties in the mountains. Ruth became a teacher in town, educating the next generation of frontier children. And James, the youngest, surprised them all by showing a talent for drawing and painting, capturing the beauty of the Montana wilderness in stunning detail. But no matter how far the children roamed, they always came back to the cabin in the mountains. It was home, the place where they had learned what family meant, what love looked like in its purest form. Penelope's hair turned gray, and Cyrus's beard grew streaked with silver. Their hands became wrinkled and spotted with age, but they still fit together perfectly, fingers intertwined. They moved a bit slower, and Cyrus's knees ached in cold weather, but their love never diminished. If anything, it grew stronger, deepened by years of shared experience in weathered storms. They celebrated their 25th wedding anniversary surrounded by children and grandchildren, the cabin overflowing with family. Someone asked Penelope what the secret was to such a long and happy marriage, and she looked at Cyrus, her eyes soft with love. "We hold on tight," she said simply. "No matter what happens, no matter how hard things get, we hold on to each other, and we never let go." Cyrus smiled at her, that rare, transformative smile that still made her heart skip a beat after all these years. "She used to worry that she clung too tight," he told their assembled family, "but I always said it was perfect. I never wanted her to let go of me anyway." The family laughed and cheered, and Penelope felt her eyes fill with tears. Happy tears. Because this was everything she had ever wanted. A man who loved her completely, children who carried their love forward into the world, and a life built on the simple foundation of never letting go. As the party wound down and the grandchildren were put to bed in various corners of the expanded cabin, Penelope and Cyrus found themselves once again on the porch, looking out at the mountains that had been their constant companions for so many years. "Do you remember the day I arrived?" Penelope asked. "I was so scared and desperate. I had no idea what I was doing." "I remember thinking you were the bravest person I had ever met," Cyrus said. "Coming all this way, alone, with nothing but hope and determination. I knew right then that you were someone special." "I thought you were going to send me away," Penelope admitted. "I thought you would take one look at me and decide I was too much trouble." "Never," Cyrus said. He turned to face her, cupping her face in his hands. Even after all these years, his touch still sent shivers down her spine. "You were never trouble, Penelope. You were a gift, the greatest gift I ever received." They kissed under the stars, two people who had found each other against all odds and had built something lasting and true. And as they stood there, holding each other close, Penelope thought about all the people who had said she clung too tight, who had criticized her capacity for love as if it were a weakness. They had been wrong. All of them. Because loving fiercely, holding on with both hands, refusing to let go, that was not weakness. It was the greatest strength a person could have. It was what had carried her through grief and loss and hardship. It was what had led her to Cyrus, to this life, to a happiness she had never imagined possible. And it was what would sustain them through whatever years remained, however many or few they might be. Because they had learned the most important lesson of all, that love was not about holding back or playing it safe or protecting yourself from potential hurt. It was about giving everything you had, trusting completely, and holding on tight to the people who mattered most. Years later, when Penelope and Cyrus were both well into their 70s, they still lived in the cabin in the mountains. Their children tried to convince them to move into town, to live somewhere more comfortable and convenient, but they refused. This was their home, the place where they had built their life together, and they were not leaving it. They moved slower now, and some tasks that had once been easy were now difficult. But they adapted, helping each other, compensating for each other's weaknesses with their own remaining strengths. Cyrus could still chop wood, though it took him longer. Penelope could still tend her garden, though she needed to rest more often. And they still held hands every evening, sitting on the porch and watching the sunset. They still shared the same bed, still woke up tangled together. They still told each other, "I love you," every single day, as if the words were new instead of worn smooth by decades of repetition. One evening in late spring, as they sat on the porch watching the mountains turn purple in the gathering dusk, Penelope said, "I have been thinking about what happens after." "After what?" Cyrus asked, though he knew exactly what she meant. "After one of us dies," Penelope said. "We cannot live forever, Cyrus. One of us is going to be left behind." Cyrus was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I used to think about that years ago. I used to worry about it, about losing you. But I've come to realize that even if the worst happens, even if I lose you tomorrow or you lose me, we will still have had this, all of this, a lifetime of love and happiness and holding on tight. That is more than most people ever get." "But I do not want to let go," Penelope said, her voice breaking. "I do not know how to be in this world without you." "Then do not let go," Cyrus said simply. He pulled her close and she buried her face in his chest, breathing in the familiar scent of him. "Hold on to me, even after I am gone. Hold on to the memories, the love, everything we built together. That is how you carry someone with you. Not by letting go, but by holding on even tighter," Penelope cried then, quiet tears that soaked into Cyrus's shirt. But they were not entirely sad tears. They were tears for the beauty of what they had, for the miracle of finding each other, for the grace of growing old together. "I love you," she whispered. "I have loved you from the moment I saw you standing in that doorway, and I will love you until my last breath and beyond." "I love you too," Cyrus said, his voice rough with emotion. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Penelope Zane. And if I died tomorrow, I would die happy, knowing that I got to love you and be loved by you." They held each other as the stars came out, as the night sounds of the wilderness rose around them. And Penelope thought about the long journey that had brought her here, from the devastation of losing Samuel to the terror of being alone and penniless, to the miracle of finding Cyrus. She thought about all the people who had criticized her for clinging too tight, for loving too much, and she smiled because she knew the truth now. There was no such thing as loving too much. There was only loving truly, completely, with your whole heart. And if that meant holding on tight, refusing to let go even when the world tried to pry your fingers loose, then so be it. That was not a weakness. It was the greatest strength there was. And as Penelope sat there in her husband's arms, surrounded by the mountains that had witnessed their love story, she knew that whatever came next, however many days or months or years they had left, it would be enough. Because they had learned to hold on tight, to love without reservation, to cling to each other through every storm. They had learned that the people who said she clung too tight were wrong, because Cyrus had always said it was perfect. He had never wanted her to let go anyway. And she never had. Not once in all the years of their marriage. She had held on tight, and he had held on just as tight in return, and together they had built something beautiful and lasting and true. A love story for the ages, written in the wilderness of Montana territory, between a desperate widow and a mountain man who saw her fierce capacity for love not as a flaw but as a gift. The story of two people who refused to let go, who clung to each other through every challenge and triumph, and who proved that sometimes the best thing you can do is hold on tight and never, ever let go. That was their legacy. That was what they would pass down to their children and grandchildren and all the generations that came after. The knowledge that love was not about restraint or distance or protecting yourself. It was about giving everything, holding nothing back, and trusting that the person you loved would catch you, hold you, and never let you fall. Penelope and Cyrus lived out their days in the cabin they had made into a home, surrounded by the wilderness they had learned to love, and the family they had created together. And when their time finally came, as it must for all people, they went together, hand in hand, still holding on tight after more than 50 years of marriage. Their children found them on the porch, where they had spent so many evenings, seated side by side, Cyrus's arm around Penelope's shoulders and her head resting on his chest. They had passed in their sleep peacefully, neither one having to face the world without the other. It was exactly as it should have been. Two people who had held on so tight in life that even death could not separate them. The family buried them together on a hillside overlooking the cabin with a view of the mountains they had loved. And on their shared headstone, their children inscribed the words that had defined their marriage. They said she clung too tight. He said it was perfect. He never wanted her to let go anyway. And so their story ended. But the love they had created lived on, in their children and grandchildren, in the lessons they had taught about holding on and never letting go, in the proof that true love was not about restraint, but about giving everything you had and trusting that it would be returned in full measure. Penelope Carmichael had arrived in Montana Territory as a desperate widow with nothing to her name but a carpetbag and a broken heart. She had left this world as Penelope Zane, beloved wife and mother and grandmother, surrounded by the fruits of a life well lived and a love that had conquered every obstacle. And Cyrus Zane, the mountain man who had thought he would spend his life alone, had instead found the greatest treasure of all, a woman who loved him completely, who clung to him with all the fierce strength of her passionate heart, and who had given him a family and a happiness beyond anything he had ever imagined. Their story was a testament to the power of holding on, of refusing to let fear or propriety or other people's judgment keep you from loving with your whole heart. It was proof that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is cling tight to the person you love and trust that they will hold on just as tight in return. And in the mountains of Montana, where the wilderness still stretched wild and free, their legacy lived on, a love story carved into the very landscape, eternal as the mountains themselves. A reminder that true love was not about letting go, but about holding on tight and never, ever letting go. The cabin still stood years after they were gone, maintained by their descendants who understood its significance. It became a place where the family gathered for reunions, where children learned about their great-great-grandparents who had loved so fiercely and so completely that they became legendary. Stories were told about Penelope's journey from St. Louis, about Cyrus's gentleness despite his size and strength, about the way they had looked at each other even in their old age, as if they were still newlyweds discovering love for the first time. And always, the story ended the same way, with the lesson that had defined their lives. Hold on tight to the people you love, and never let go. Because that is not weakness, that is the greatest strength there is.